Hi there, everyone. Now that it's 6 o'clock, we're going to get started. Welcome to What You Need to Know About Participating in Federal Elections, a webinar series. This is the second session of a two-part series and is co-hosted by Inclusion Canada and Elections Canada. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mark Mushler, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. I am a white man of medium build with light brown hair. I am wearing a white and blue dress shirt and am seated in front of a neutral background with a painting on the wall. Before we begin the presentation, we would like to run through some housekeeping and accessibility items with you. French interpretation, ASL, LSQ, and English and French CART captioning are provided for this event. To turn on English or French CART captioning, please click the link provided in the chat box. The CART captions will appear in a new window. Using the toolbar along the top of the window, you can adjust the caption size, font style, and color. You can also change the background color. To turn on French interpretation, please go to the toolbar along the bottom of your screen and click the arrow next to the interpretation button. An options menu will appear. Click on French. You will now hear the French, as well as the original audio at a much lower level. If you prefer to remove the original audio, click the interpretation button again and select Mute Original Audio. We will be spotlighting ASL and LSQ interpreters so that their videos always remain visible on your screen. To make sure that you are able to see both the speaker and the interpreter at the same time, we recommend you use a side-by-side view. To set a side-by-side view, click on View in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, then click Side-by-Side Gallery. You can adjust your screen layout to control how large certain elements appear. Drag the slide that appears in the middle to the left to make the speaker and interpreter videos bigger. Drag the slider to the right to make the PowerPoint presentation bigger. There will be a question and answer period after today's presentation. You can submit questions using the Q&A function. You can open this feature by clicking Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We understand that the Q&A box may not be an accessible format for everyone, so questions can also be submitted by email as either written or audio messages to forum@inclusioncanada.ca. Because of the large number of people participating in today's webinar, it may not be possible to respond to all questions. If you have technical difficulties, please email us at forum@inclusioncanada.ca and we will do our best to help you. To avoid common issues, please make sure you are watching the webinar from a location with a strong internet connection and that your computer's volume is turned on. This event was designed to follow inclusive participation guidelines and to model accessible practices. This means we will stop speakers if needed to ask them to slow down or if there are technical problems. It also means that we are using the Q&A function instead of the chat box for most communication because the chat can create accessibility barriers for people using screen readers. Thank you again for being with us today. We would like to begin today's event by paying respect to the people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. I would now like to introduce our guest speaker from Elections Canada, Jessica Brillo. Jessica, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much. I am so happy to be here today talking to you about registering and voting in a federal election. And I will say that the timing is especially relevant because an election has been called. Election Day is set for April 28th. So today I will go through everything you need to know to register and vote in this upcoming federal election. Next slide, please. My goals of this presentation are first, to hope that you understand the steps to registering and voting in the upcoming federal election. Second, that you will have all the information you need to make a personalized plan for how you will vote. And lastly, to understand some of the electoral safeguards in place to confidently vote in the federal election. This just means I will go through some of the security features we have that maintain the integrity of the Canadian democratic system. Next slide, please. How I hope to accomplish these goals. First, we will go through the basics of the election, the registering and voting process, and then all the accessibility tools and services we have at the polls or otherwise to help reduce barriers to voting. Then some of those security and electoral safeguards I mentioned. And then lastly, the conclusion and time for as many questions as I can take. Next slide, please. So first, Elections Canada, we are non-partisan agents of Parliament. So what this means is that we are not the government, but rather an independent body that is in charge of running the federal elections. We make sure that every Canadian citizen who is 18 years of age or older can access their democratic right to vote or be a candidate. But of course, we know that there are barriers to this electoral participation. In response, Elections Canada has created my team. It's called Inspire Democracy. And our job is to find out who experiences exactly what kind of barriers to the Canadian democratic system, and then respond to those barriers. So, for example, my team has a very robust research and consultation side, and they are out there collaborating with individuals all across Canada and working with some big organizations who represent individuals who experience barriers to find out what these barriers are. And we have learned that people with disabilities experience barriers to electoral participation. Many of these barriers include not knowing enough to participate, being unsure of where to go for more information, or dealing with a lengthy list of acceptable IDs to vote at the polls. So then there's my side of the team. We are the outreach side. So my side of the team, we continue to collaborate with organizations all across the country to make sure that information about these accessibility programs and tools are getting out there to everybody who needs to hear about it. so such as this presentation with Inclusion Canada. Next slide, please. So in order to vote on election day, there are three main criteria that you must meet. The first is that you must be at least 18 years of age on election day, which is April 28th. You must be a Canadian citizen, and you also must provide proof of identity and address at the polls. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later because, as I mentioned, we know that that one is one of the biggest barriers. The next slide, please. So first, in order to vote in the federal election, you must register to vote. So Elections Canada maintains a national register of electors. This is important because it helps us ensure that everyone who votes on election day is indeed eligible to vote. There's a number of ways that you can register. The first is through our website, which is elections.ca. And right on the main page, you'll see a box that says register to vote or check to make sure your registration is up to date. So if you have voted in a previous federal election, we know that you are registered. But if you have moved since that federal election, you may need to update your address. So when you go through the website, you can fill out the questions and the prompts to make sure that you are either registered or that your address is up to date. There are other ways to register to vote as well. You can go by mail by calling us. So at 1-800-463-6868. And we also have a number which is TTY that I will mention. And that phone number is, oh, of course, I don't have it handy. One moment. TTY 1-800-361 8935. And that way we can send you a form in the mail to update your voter registration. Now, there is another way as well, and that is when you go to the polls. So if it comes election day and you said, oh, shoot, I forgot to register in advance, that's okay. You can go to your polling station and register to vote the day of. However, there are some benefits to registering in advance. So first, it means you don't have to wait in that extra line on election day at the polling station. And the second is that you will receive a voter information card in the mail. Now, this comes out a couple of weeks before election day, and this is a card that is personally addressed to you. It will tell you exactly where to find your polling station. It will tell you some of these alternative programs and tools to help your accessibility to voting, as well as how to contact Elections Canada for more information. Now, I think that that is benefit enough, so I encourage you, don't wait. Go to our website or give us a call to make sure your registration's up to date. So you'll receive that voter information card in the mail and you will have everything you need to vote. Next slide, please. Now, in order to vote, you need to prove your identity and address. Now, we know this is one of the biggest barriers, and there are three different ways you can do this. The first way is to present one piece of government-issued photo ID that will have your name, photo, and address. Examples of this might be your driver's license or your passport. But of course, we know that not everyone has those pieces of ID. So alternatively, you can also present two pieces of authorized ID that have your name and your address. And we have a very long list of what might qualify for these second pieces of ID. Now, this could be your voter information card that I mentioned earlier. So there's another benefit to registering in advance. It also might be a library card, a debit card, a power bill, a prescription pill container, you might be surprised at some of the options we have on this list. You can access this list on our website at elections.ca. If you scroll down a ways, there's a box that says ID at the polls, and you can see a full list of these authorized IDs. But now, of course, we know that not everyone has access to those secondary pieces of ID. So there is a third program, which is to have someone vouch for your identity at the polls. So if you go to the polling station on election day and you bring someone with you who is from the same electoral district as you, and that person has their pieces of ID, they can indeed vouch and say, yes, I know who this is. They are located at this address. They can vouch for you, and then they can vote. Excuse me, then you can vote. Next slide, please. Now, so far, I've been talking lots about voting at the polls on election day, and that is indeed one of the most common ways of voting, but we know that that is not the most accessible to everybody. Therefore, there are a number of different ways you might choose to vote. So if you choose to vote on election day at the polls, they are open April 28th from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. But what happens if you are out of town or busy on election day? We also have advanced polling days. So this year, it is actually over Easter long weekend. So on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday before election day, you can go into the advanced polls to vote. Now, if going to either this polling station on election day or advanced polls is not accessible to you, don't worry, there's other ways too, such as voting by mail. So once you receive that voter information card in the mail, and now I know you will, make sure your registration is up to date so that you do, you can register to vote by mail. This can also be done directly through our website. But what will happen is you will receive a package in the mail that has a special ballot where you write down who it is you are voting for. That ballot goes inside an envelope, and that envelope goes inside another envelope. So that way, when we receive the envelope, we know that you have voted and we make note of that. So then you are unable to vote a second time, say if you went to the polls. But then that first envelope, that's the one that's associated with your name. And then your ballot gets opened up later once it is disassociated with your name. Therefore, though we know you voted, we don't know who you voted for when you vote by mail. Now, there's also another way to vote, which is at any local Elections Canada office. So in every single electoral district across the country, there is a pop-up Elections Canada office. They are all open right now as I speak, and you can go there anytime between now and election day in order to vote, so long as it's when they are open. That way, if you need additional assistance or you prefer, say, that quieter environment, often these environments are, they have that extra assistance and they are quieter. Now, I will mention that currently many of the electoral districts, we're still waiting for the official paperwork from the candidates. So this means we don't know yet who the candidates are in some of these electoral districts. So I recommend, if you're going to take this option, wait another week, and that way when you go in, you'll be able to vote and you will know who the candidates are. Next slide, please. Now, if you choose to go into a polling station, either on election day or advanced polls or at the office, we have a number of accessibility tools and services to increase accessibility to voting and with your experience. So for example, we have larger ballots that have the candidate names in large print. We also have large print and braille lists of candidates to refer to. We have a tactile and braille voting template. So the ballots are able to slide into this plastic sheath that has the braille down the side and indents where you can mark the ballot. So that way you can still vote using braille. We have magnifying glasses and large grip pencils. And also, you can arrange for interpretation at the polls. Now, this can be in a number of languages, but also, as very relevant today, ASL and LSQ. This has to be arranged in advance. So once you receive your voter information card in the mail, there'll be contact information there, or you can go to our website in order to make these arrangements to meet an ASL or LSQ interpreter at the polls with you. Now, the last tool, which is assistance marking your ballot by bringing someone you know or by asking an election worker, I have a whole slide for this. So let's go next slide, please. So this is our assisted voting program. So if marking your ballot is not accessible to you, you have a couple of options. Either first, you can bring a trusted person with you, like a friend or a support worker, or you can ask one of the Election Canada workers who are at the polls. Now, whoever it is that assists you makes a solemn declaration and they vow to keep your vote a secret. This could be a relative, a spouse, or partner, but I will note that they can only assist one elector at a time. Oh, excuse me. I didn't read that correctly. If it is a relative, a spouse, or a partner, they may assist more than one elector. But if it is a friend or a helper, they can assist only one voter. Scratch what I said before. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to show you this video. We're going to exit out of the PowerPoint presentation so we can view it a little bit bigger and slower. I'll be sure that any words that are on the screen, I will read out loud. But this is the experience of Amna. She was a first-time voter, and she's just going to tell you a little bit about her experience. When it comes to federal elections, there are many ways to be a part of the action, whether it's registering and voting, working in an election, becoming a candidate, or sharing information with your community. In this video, Amna Allah describes her experience as a first-time voter.
So I think the first time that I did vote, this was during COVID. So I believe this was the federal elections. I'm forgetting the year, but I missed the municipal election. So yeah, this was my first elections that I was voting for. It was during COVID, so it was kind of like a weird time. But I do remember like us getting in the mail that, you know, it's time for me to vote, and I went with my parents. I'm the eldest, so I was the first child to vote, so I was excited about that. And I was really confused about the whole process. Like I remember us getting mailed something, but I was never really taught the entire process of like what it is, how do you vote. So I remember my mom going through it with me, and then when we entered the polling station, when I was about to leave, I remember one of the election workers, she asked me, like, is this your first time voting? Because I looked so confused, and I guess I looked younger than the other people there, and I was like, yeah, it's my first time voting. And she like congratulated me. I got like a sticker, a little like I'm forgetting, like a badge thing as well, and everyone applauded me while I was leaving, and I was like, you know what, this is a nice experience. It was really quick and it was fast, and I felt like because it's during COVID as well, I feel like they were adhering to the COVID guidelines as well really nicely, so I felt safe as well.
What would your advice be for a first-time voter?
I think my first line of advice for anyone who's new to voting is definitely to go with someone. Like I went with my parents the first time, but even like next time, if I were to vote for in the federal elections, I would definitely like bring a friend along with me. I just think it's nice to have like a support system there in case you're like confused when you're there, but also the election workers there are also quite nice, so they can help you out as well. But also, I think I'd recommend for any first time voter is to actually sit down and kind of go over all the candidates. Because I remember the first time that I went, I knew a handful of names, but even then, I was kind of surprised with like how many times I was having to like check mark people's names, and a lot of these people I didn't know, and I felt bad for just like the day of kind of like guessing, okay, I'm just gonna go with this person's name. It's not the best way to do it, and it's not the best way to make use of your vote. Obviously, I can't dictate how other people want to use their vote. They're well within their right to vote for someone or not vote at all. But I would recommend that if you're taking the time and effort to go, well, then actually maybe research about different candidates. Perhaps there's people just like you who are running around your age group fighting for causes that you are passionate about. And so definitely research beforehand and perhaps go with someone, just to make the whole experience a bit more enjoyable as well. But it doesn't take that much time though, in my experience.
How does voting make you feel?
I think for me, voting is definitely something that I feel empowered about. I feel like growing up, you know, you hear about things going on in Canada, you learn about different issues within Canada that I feel so strongly about and passionate about, but you can't really do anything about it. And then you hit 18 years old, and finally, now you kind of have that power where I can elect someone, right? And oftentimes we like to think that our vote doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but off some of these elections, you know, it's just like only by 100 votes or something. So absolutely, your vote does matter. And for me, again, like I want to be able to practice my constitutional right, regardless of whether my one vote is making the huge difference. I like to know that like I took the initiative to vote for someone who I feel like represents you know, what I'm feeling and what I'm passionate about.
This video was produced by the Samara Center for Democracy in partnership with Elections Canada. And we're just bringing up the PowerPoint presentation again here. So I would love to chat a little bit about some of the voter registration safeguards. So some of the tools we have in place to maintain the integrity of the democratic system here in Canada. So first, we ensure that only people who are eligible to vote are indeed the ones who vote. And this is accomplished through our voter registration process. We also keep track of who has already voted. So on election day, you have your assigned polling station, and unless you put in paperwork to request something else, say for accessibility reasons, you cannot vote at another polling station. When you go in to vote, they note that you have voted there, and therefore you are unable to vote a second time. Or I also mentioned that if you take advantage of the vote by mail system, for example, you would not then be able to vote on election day at the polls a second time. So these systems talk to each other. We are always updating voter registrations. They'll receive a huge influx these days, but definitely ask that if you can register to vote in advance. Not only are there those benefits to you that I mentioned earlier, but it also helps to shorten the lines at the polls. We also guard voter secrecy in Canada. No one knows ultimately who you voted for, though we know who has voted, and therefore that information can never be used against you in various situations. And I like to mention this because it is not always a given in democratic systems around the world. We are really proud that here in
Hi there, everyone. Sorry, it looks like we're having a couple technical difficulties here. We're just going to give Jessica a minute to get back on. We'll just see if she's able to jump on shortly here. So please bear with us.
Hi there. Bandwidth connection had a hiccup for a second. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So you'll notice here that I have 2 QR codes because we would love to hear your feedback on this presentation. We are always trying to make sure these presentations are accessible, and we take your feedback very seriously and entirely in good faith. So the QR code on the left will go to an English website. The QR code on the right will go to a French website. And I believe they are also going to put the links in the chat if you would rather click through there. Yes, so anyways, at this point, I'm going to leave the screen up for a little bit, but I will address any questions. And I see there is one through the Q&A. So I see a question which is, do volunteers in the assisted voting program know how to communicate with people who can hear but don't speak and will require assistance in marking their ballot? Thanks. Thanks for your question, Lois. So I'm happy to say that everyone who works at the polls, as a part of their training, they learn best practices in how to best engage with folks who do require assistance at the polls. I will also note that folks who work at the polls and help with the assisted voting program are not volunteers. This is a common misconception, but everyone who works at the polls are paid to be there. Last week, I gave a presentation like this one, all about working at the polls. And so I will also just plug that we are hiring at the polls. And so if you are interested in working at the polls, on our website, elections.ca, there is also a jobs tab if you are interested in taking up some of those paid positions. Let's see.
I actually have one other question here for you, Jessica.
Yes.
So if we're getting really close to election day and we aren't sure where we can vote, what should we do?
Good question. So if you aren't sure where to go on election day, if you go to elections.ca, right on the main page, there is a box where you can put in your postal code, and it will tell you exactly where your polling station is, when you can go there. It'll prompt you to bring your IDs, and also how to access any of these accessibility tools that I've mentioned today.
That's great. Thank you so much. We have one other question that's come in. So somebody's wondering, so they mentioned that accessible voting tools such as larger print and pencils are available. He's just wondering if these are only available at Election Canada's offices or at the polling stations themselves.
Thank you for that question. Those are available at all the polling stations, so not just the offices. Something else I didn't mention that maybe I should is that every single polling station has a list of accessibility criteria that they must meet. on the day of the election. And so when you receive your voter information card in the mail, or if you go to the website and put in your postal code to see where your polling station is, it will list this accessibility criteria that the polling station meets. And if you require some accessibility component that is not available at your polls, then you can go through the website and vote at an alternative polling station.
Perfect. Well, if there are no more questions in the chat, and I don't believe any have come through at the forum@Inclusion Canada email, I think we can wrap up the Q&A time. So, oh, we actually have one that just popped up. Oh, that's a really good question. So somebody's wondering, are there specific accessible voting areas for people who need assistance? So I'm thinking, are there specific polling stations or locations that would like specifically support people who have accessibility needs?
Thanks for the question. So if you require assistance, any Elections Canada staff at any one of the polling stations will be able to assist you.
Perfect. Okay, and I don't see any further questions here. I might give everyone just a second to put in the rest of your questions, but just in case, as a reminder for anyone who might have missed it, we did do a session before this one about a week ago or so, actually exactly a week ago, that will be made available by recording in English and French. ASL and LSQ will be in there as well, so if you missed that session, we'll be making that available shortly.
I do see there was a question here in the Q&A. It says, thank you for providing the session today. You're welcome. I may have missed this. Oh, it disappeared. Oh, because it's answered. So I'll just keep talking about it since I already started. Someone asked if the slides will be available, and yes, a copy of this recording will be available on the Inclusion Canada website shortly with a link to download the PowerPoint presentation as well. So here I am saying it out loud in case, which we didn't need, but I did it anyways.
Hey, it just increases the accessibility, right? That makes it even easier to access for sure. So I would like to thank Jessica and Elections Canada for co-hosting today's event with Inclusion Canada. As we mentioned, this event recording is going to be made available shortly on our website, so please feel free to share that and to use that if you'd like a reminder on some of the kind of questions that you might have around registration for voting. Shortly after this webinar, a feedback survey will be sent around about the event, which will go directly to your email. This link is also going to be posted in the chat shortly. We really appreciate you all taking the time to complete it. That feedback is what helps us to improve future events such as this one to make sure that they're as useful and accessible as possible. So we want to thank you all again for being with us today and during our session last week as well. We've hoped that you found both of the sessions insightful and useful.
Thank you so much for coming today, and I hope to see you all at the polls.